back on the workshop floor by popular demand for a new grade and a second look. This is a community call for TKG01 King Landio. With a kit of super first aid, countdown, reduce, biped legs, and the leg ability of Unshakable, which buffs the leg shoot and melee resist when in hitting phase. Now, King Landio has only been in the game for a fairly short amount of time at time of recording, having first dropped initially in Metarod S's 5.5-year anniversary celebration as a successor to the original Trump King type Gan King. But, based on popular demand, a lot of folks decided that my original grades for King Landio weren't necessarily fair compared to how he actually performed in-game when he officially dropped. So this is a popular regrade to look at him one more time and see just how well he measures up now that he's been in the game a pretty hot minute now. Super First Aid on the head part is a setup-based skill, which is basically a far more potent version of First Aid. So it will put a basic plant on the field that when an ally with a broken part completes a healing phase, it will restore the part back to operation. However, in trade of standard First Aid, Super First Aid will instead restore the broken part in question to 50% HP when restoring a broken part, at the cost that instead of getting a full charge of 5 uses per plant, you instead get a total of 3. Which I think honestly is a very fair trade-off, which instead of being barely alive but back in action at 10%, having a couple fewer charges but a far more safer amount of HP restored is a far better and more viable option to get you back in the game faster, and of course takes a little bit of load off the ally healer that's trying to keep him alive. Countdown on the right arm is a melee attack that we've seen for a pretty hot minute now, but to explain briefly, upon successfully inflicting the timer on the target, it will start a countdown timer at a count of 3. When this timer reaches 0, it does not matter how healthy the target is or if they are basically unscratched, that timer reaching 0 is an instantaneous good night. There is no second chance, there is no pass go, it is instant shutdown, period. Which makes it extremely potent in being able to cheese a lot of very powerful or exceptionally bulky enemies that are just impossible to brute force to. But given that it is an ailment, a little bit of caution is advised, since this does mean that it can be removed or negated by anyone that is using stat cleanse or something similar. Reduce on the other arm is another conventional melee skill which actually works part and parcel with a lot of negative ailments, but countdown specifically is where it reaches its highest potential. Upon attacking a target with Reduce, it will take any of the positive buffs or the negative ailments in question and reduce the counts on them by a count of 2. So this means if it attacks anything with a positive buff that starts at about 12 or 14 counts, well, guess what? It is now -2, which makes it a whole lot easier to brute force it than it would be to simply wait for it to expire or find another way to forcibly remove it. In the case of Countdown, though, this works as a perfect 1-2 punish, because instead of having to hit an enemy 4 times once the countdown has been inflicted, including the first strike, now you only have to hit it 2 or even 3 times, depending on the timing in particular, which makes Countdown a whole lot more dangerous than it was before. Instead of having to possibly cheese it and tank 2 or 3 hits, well, now you have far fewer that you can be safe from once Reduce is officially in play. Biped legs means that King Landio will have very solid coverage across all terrains with fairly good terrain compatibility, and his leg stats as an extremely heavy bulk fighter are most certainly nothing to disappoint at either. A base mobility of 844 means he's off to a very good start in the speed department, and really doesn't need a lot of outside assistance as far as, say, Metarod bonus, or terrain, or even someone with mobile boost or something similar. An evade of 539 is definitely a big pain point for him though, but given the sheer bulk that King Landio is bringing, evasion is kind of the least of his concerns, and honestly very justifiably so. However, he does exceptionally make up for this though with a very impressive melee resist of 1844 and a shoot resist of nearly 1300. So this means that even before Unshakable comes into effect, which will boost these even higher, it does mean that he's going to be very, very difficult to take down in 1 or 2 good hits. And even if you do, the sheer bulk that he has makes it very difficult to do so effectively. In the armor department, he's packing about 3,300 for the head, about 5,759 per arm, and just shy of 6,000 for the legs. So not only is he incredibly bulky in the resistance department, but he's also extremely healthy in the HP department as well, which makes him a very dangerous force to be reckoned with for someone that you want to take down fairly quickly. As far as power and heating and cooling is concerned, really nothing to note with as far as that is concerned, because as someone who's focusing more on a dangerous ailment than DPS, damage really is the least of his concerns. Even with Reduce having such a potent use, you're not really going to be using King Landio for damage. But a heating stat on Super First Aid of 913 does mean, however, that he can fire this off fairly quickly and outrun most stuff pretty conventionally without having any assistance required. Now, much like the original Gan King, King Landio also is capable of changing into a solid wall or coat of arms type of form, where he exchanges his kit out entirely for a truly and heavily defense and support oriented one, with a kit of Zettai Guard, Force Trap, Force Plant, Float Legs, and the leg ability of Pupa, which reduces the incoming damage taken upon maintaining a certain Metaforce threshold. Now, one of the other reasons that I'm regrading King Landio is the fact that in my original breakdown, I did incorrectly grade his Force Plant as Charge Plant, and that is actually incorrect. It was actually a brand new skill that he was introducing alongside Force Trap, but I am getting ahead of myself. Zettai Guard on Drive A is a defense-oriented skill that will put King Landio on the center line to intercept any and all incoming attacks for himself and his allies. Now, what sets Zettai Guard apart though is the fact that unlike Guard 500, Gunpowder Guard, Shoot Guard, or even Needle or Minus Guard, Zettai Guard nullifies all damage modifiers and ailments. So that means if you try to catch him with Deathlock, with Destroy, Defense Seal, Thunder, Freeze, anything of the like to try to slow him down or try to force him out of stance sooner, it is all going to instantly fail. Zettai Guard guarantees that the only damage getting through will be simply raw, unmodified damage with nothing else to it. So that Ghost Shot with full charge behind it, well, guess what? You're not getting any charge. Same thing can be said for Hyper Beam, Hyper Laser, Beam, Beam Sword, Ghost, Ghost Shot, anything else of the like that uses a modifier. That doesn't count when it's intercepted by Zettai Guard. Plus, given that King Landio is using this as a meta change model, means that he is also immune to Destroy that tries to cut him short. Force Trap on Drive B is a setup skill that puts a negative plant on the enemy side of the field, and while this plant is active and as long as it stays on the field, it will be continuously eating charge from the enemies that trigger it, which is basically anytime an enemy goes to the command line to complete a turn, and it will be eating a good chunk of at least 7 to 10% upon full charge, which means that not only is Zettai Guard able to be completely immune to Destroy, but in this manner, King Landio also makes himself outright immune to Rock Crusher, which is the only other counter to any other kind of Metaforce or meta change type of user. So this basically covers 2 weaknesses and kills 2 birds with 1 stone just between these 2 alone. Drive C of Force Plant, on the other hand, puts a plant on the allied side of the field that, much like Force Trap stealing charge from the enemies while it's active, Force Plant will be passively granting charge to the allies that complete heating phases. Now, I actually misgraded this as Charge Plant like I said, but to explain the difference between Charge Plant and Force Plant, Charge Plant requires you to actually charge Metaforce to gain that extra bonus CG. Force Plant does not, which means that for any action completed, period, as long as that plant is active on the field, every ally is getting a little extra charge to their charge gauge to bolster any potential charge sustain they require, or even help push toward a Metaforce spam if you're backed against the wall. Float Legs also means that King Landio will have fairly good coverage across all terrains at A rank across the board, and even more impressive damage reduction than he had before. Pupa means that upon maintaining a certain Metaforce threshold, he is able to keep his damage even lower on top of anything else he's packing. But with a base mobility of 941, his mobility does go up just a little bit compared to him in bipedal form. But his evade at 544 does not change all that drastically. So again, given that he is designing himself to be a sheer wall of bulk, evasion is the least of his concerns. However, his resist stats do go up considerably to 2139 in both melee and shoot resist, making him even more impressive of a sheer force of wall than he was before. And that's not even counting Pupa coming into effect, which is an additional 20 or so % damage reduction upon a certain Metaforce charge being maintained. Now, all this being said though, my original grade for King Landio when he first released was an 8.5 out of 10 for a pure set and a 7.5 out of 10 as mixed parts. Primarily on the grounds that while he had a lot of very impressive bulk, it was fairly difficult to ascertain how efficiently he would be able to serve as a shield compared to the big three defenders, and that is to say Basalt, Virgo, and Jackal, especially in the speed department. However, a lot of folks felt that my grade for that was moderately unfair, especially given the fact that I did also erroneously grade Force Plant as Charge Plant, which also did fairly hurt his overall grade. So that is exactly why I'm revisiting him. In all this in mind, and looking into him actually in performance and seeing everything in action, his new score I very easily and undoubtedly have to grade at a 10 out of 10 pure set and a must-have model. Now, I am extremely stingy on giving out 10 out of 10s, and those that have followed me for these last 4 years will know this. I don't give these out willy-nilly. But having to regrade and revisit King Landio and see him in performance and in action does undoubtedly affirm to me that he is most certainly deserving of that 10 out of 10 grade. If you manage to get a hold of King Landio, not only can you render yourself immune to destroy, but Force Trap also guarantees that you can cover any rock crushers that try to catch you off guard as well. Plus, Force Plant on top of that is nice as well for any charge sustain. And if you find yourself backed against the wall, you do have Countdown and Reduce that you can make good use of extremely efficiently for any heavy bulk you want to get rid of sooner than later. As mixed parts, however, I do have to maintain my original grade at 7.5 out of 10, especially on the grounds that he is still extremely bulky, but I am going to maintain my arguments that even though you are able to still use him fairly efficiently, most of the reason you'd want to use King Landio is as a pure set. But if you find yourself needing to mix things up, Super First Aid for very potent First Aid plants for that 50% restoration, and very good bulky legs with Unshakable for even more bulk on top of that are things that you really and very easily cannot argue against in any team you put them on.